Hello, and welcome to the second instalment of the Arcos Labs Spring Virtual Panel Series. Really happy you could join us today. My name is Lizzie Clitheroe. I head up product marketing here at Arcos Labs. And for our warm-up act today, before we have some great panelists come on and talk account security, you have myself and the infamous Brett Johnson. Brett, care to introduce yourself?
Lizzie, I'm well. How are you doing?
I am great, thank you.
All right.
A nice sinister background you got rocking there.
Well, talking about dark stuff, need a dark background.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, yeah, as I say, we do have a great panel coming up with panelists featuring Netflix, iHub, and LinkedIn. Going to be delving into some of the latest account security trends, what they're doing to protect their businesses, and all that all important kind of balancing user experience with the account security measures we put in place. And first up, we'll be talking a little bit about kind of what we're seeing out there, both from the Arcos Labs perspective and some of the great work that Brett is doing as well. So, Brett, we know you as a kind of former FBI most wanted turned, you work very closely with businesses trying to actually protect against some of this work. How's your experience as a chief criminal officer at Arcos going? Better than working with the correctional officers, I take it?
Well, it certainly is better, and it's far safer as well. You don't have to worry about going to sleep at night and someone getting you. But chief criminal officer, I am the first in the industry, and this is just indicative of what Arcos does. We at Arcos do things that no one else is doing. And when you think about it, what is a chief criminal officer? And what I do is I talk to clients, I talk to potential customers as well. But not only that, I talk to the community at large about the problems of cybersecurity, cybercrime, what I'm seeing, what the upcoming trends are, things like that. And we offer solutions. It's not just always about the Arcos products. We believe in a holistic approach to cybercrime and cybersecurity, talking about all the problems that are out there.
Very much so. It's not always the glitz and glamour of virtual panel series and presentations. You're actually really kind of doing that threat research and advisory to companies, right?
Oh, and that's what's important. People need to understand it's not, you don't just have one type of criminal out there. You've got different types of attackers that are always looking to victimize you or your organization. And they use different types of tools, different attack vectors, all these different types of things. And it's important to inform everyone about the problems that are out there.
Absolutely. It came up on our panel that we did last week around some of these problems we're facing can seem a bit relentless at times, that, it's constant sort of, a constant battle. But I think the way that we really actually keep us keeping united as a community and kind of pooling resources is the way to make sure that we're not kind of downtrodden and a bit defeated by this stuff at sometimes.
That's what's important. We're talking about millions, not hundreds, not thousands, but millions of different criminals that are trying to attack at all times. That's what's important to remember. When I ran Shadow Crew back in the day, we ended with 4,000 members. Fast forward to 2017, Alpha Bay, largest criminal group, 240,000 members. 2 more years later, Black Market, 1.15 million members. And then the pandemic comes. And at that point, the numbers of fraudsters really explode. So you're talking about communities that are millions of members large, millions of members that are looking to attack, victimize you or your company.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And what we're going to be focusing on today is specifically around the account security topic. And I'll kick the proceedings off with some stats. Who doesn't like some geeky data? So about once a quarter, me and my team look at the data coming out for the Arcos Labs platform. We're blessed to work with some really cool companies, global footprint, lots of different industries. So it means we get a nice little sort of insight into what's really going on out there with attack trends and things like that. And account security is a big thing we work with customers on. So looking at what's happening in this perspective. It's worth noting first up, though, that actually overall, this is looking at Q1 data, so Q1 2022. And overall, the attack rate, actually, we saw a bit of a dip. So what's this mean? I guess, sometimes we do expect a bit of a dip after
Sure.
the kind of the holiday shopping bonanza that we see in Q4 when every fraudster comes out to play. So there is sometimes a bit of a seasonality, but kind of thinking about more larger trends that might indicate is, I guess, the switch towards that more stealth mode and quality over quantity when it comes to attacks, where it actually sometimes makes it a harder problem to solve for businesses. Are you seeing that?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, there's a few factors that come into play there. You certainly got the holiday season. So from October through usually the first to second week of January, that is also Christmas season for fraudsters, and you see that increase. You've also got the downturn from stimulus fraud that's taking place. So you've got a lot of fraudsters that were out there committing crimes during the pandemic. They're not taking a back seat, but they're pausing to consider what new avenue of fraud to dive into. And at the same time, we're seeing a huge increase in fraudsters upping their game, revamping their operational security so that they're not identified, using different types of tools as well to attack. It used to be, a fraudster was not, and fraudsters are not sophisticated. The platform itself is where the sophistication comes from. And that platform now is offering more sophisticated tools at an easier to use way. So that all this together is what you're seeing.
Yeah, and it definitely lowers the barrier of entry. And, it's not always like these cyber criminal masterminds that we're coming up against day to day. It's actually people who've just got access to more sophisticated tools. And one of the things we see that play out in is, so we've got a stat there around credential stuffing attacks. So 4% of all Arcos Labs traffic we see as a credential stuffing attack. 4% doesn't sound that high, but actually when you think about across all legitimate and non-legitimate traffic, and we usually sat after some of the protections at the edge, which is really trying to catch that kind of bulk attacks. So we're still seeing a not insignificant amount getting through and having to deal with that. And this is somewhere that we've definitely seen some innovation come in from the tools that are used to attack, and try and get past those no defenses and kind of do those more randomization and kind of other evasion techniques, right?
Well, what you're saying, I used to teach this when I was a criminal. We always taught to innovate. Innovation breeds supremacy was the title of the lesson that we had. And what you're seeing now is you're seeing these cybercrime platforms that are offering these more sophisticated tools, but they're coming up with ways to make sure that the common cyber criminal, those 99% of cyber criminals that have never used bots before or have never used any sophistication whatsoever other than maybe a spoofed phone call, you're seeing these individuals that are able to use these more sophisticated tools. And at the same time, you're seeing the marketplaces, the dark web marketplaces are starting to offer these tools that have not been offered before. And here's what I want people to realize, that tools for cyber criminals, they typically, almost 100% of the time, they are not tools that are developed for crime. These are legal tools. These are tools that have a very good real world legitimate use that are simply repurposed for criminal activities. And they're very effective because they usually have a team of engineers that have designed them to be good. And then criminals figure out ways to use them for criminal activities.
Yes, always the opportunist.
Always.
Right? And again, some of this, some of these site findings really dovetail into one another. But something that we're coming up against is that to detect, a credential stuffing attack or bot-driven account security attacks, it's 3 times more complex now than it was sort of 12, 18 months ago. We need to analyze 3 times the amount of signals to actually accurately determine whether it's legitimate or not. And we don't expect that to have gone up and then stay that way. The more sophisticated, us as vendors and the businesses we work with, the more sophisticated the defenses put in place, the more kind of subtle the attacks and harder to actually identify, which is what's driving this on. So this is probably going to be another 3 times, if not 6 times in another 18 months.
And here's what's important to remember. I mean, fraudsters, this is their career. This is not their first day on the job. You come up with a security tool that stops a specific type of fraud that they're profitable in, and they're going to look for ways to bypass that. So what's happening here is we're seeing a lot of these attacks. If it's a bot type driven attack, we're seeing a lot of bots that are really sophisticated bots that are mimicking human activity, and it becomes much more difficult to stop or identify that bot traffic at that point. Arcos is extremely good at that. We're top in the industry for that. But criminals continue to change and adapt, and you need a company or a security tool that continues to change and adapt with criminals. So it's always about being proactive, never reactive. If you're reactive, you are always losing at the end of the day.
Yeah, because then you're sort of on the back foot, and it's the attacker that's in the driving seat. So
Exactly.
we don't particularly want. And when thinking about the account security problem, there's kind of like the two sides of the coin that we protect. It's the account signups and account logins, and the actual downstream monetization of these can be, it can be somewhat linked, but are actually quite different, and it really depends on the industry, the type of business, and how they kind of cash out. But we do see that account signups, we've long since seen, account logins as a big target for attacks, because you can do a lot once you're in a legitimate person's account. But currently seeing 1 in 4 account signups is malicious, which seems very high. We see a lot of promotion abuse and kind of setting up fake accounts to set up fake profiles, if you like. There's a communication channel, and we see a lot of scams downstream. So does that kind of 1 in 4 number surprise you, Brett?
Actually, I think it's a little low. If you want to know the truth, here's the thing, and I've said this before: if you have a product or service that makes money, which means if you've got something on your site, it's profitable to you, it's valuable to you. Well, it's valuable to a criminal as well. So you're talking fake reviews, maybe rewards points, whatever that may be. It's important to have those signups in place. So you see criminals all the time that are looking for signups with accounts, and it may be something as it may be signing up for accounts and then using them later, just making sure that you're in the system, and then letting those accounts age out until you can commit whatever type of fraud that you're going to commit. But absolutely, signups are extremely important, and the issue with that is it's very easy to sign up to a site. It takes time unless you're automating that type of attack. When you're automating that attack, it's very profitable for criminals at that point. Very profitable.
Yeah. And just one last note on some of the data we've seen, that we typically have seen far more volume of attacks coming from sort of desktop channel than mobile. That is starting to change. We're working with more and more businesses that are very much mobile first, so it's going to stick out slightly if somebody's trying to do something from a different channel. But I think this is probably indicative of consumer trends, and then the fraud attack trends have sort of lagged behind this somewhat. We do see more legit mobile traffic than malicious, but that is starting to kind of catch up with kind of changing consumer activity.
Right, and understand fraudsters are going to go where that activity is. A fraudster does not want to stick out. He doesn't want to be unique in a system. He wants to come in like everyone else, and that's how you commit fraud. If you're standing out, someone's going to pay attention to you. So we are going to continue, as more and more things become mobile, we're going to continue to see that transition over there. We've been seeing it, but the thing is that criminals, a lot of them are manual. They can spoof devices on desktops or laptops, things like that as well. But we're continuing to see that transition over, because from the criminal side, it becomes harder and harder to spoof devices, because like our product is very good about recognizing that spoof device fingerprint. So because of that, you see fraudsters that are moving more to mobile devices where they don't really have to worry about a lot of that. It comes in as a clean device, blah, blah, blah.
And this is a slide I think it would be really interesting to get your perspective on, Brett, as a key part of the way that we're looking at the world and looking at how do we put the right defense strategies in place is actually just understanding that attacker motivation. And we've definitely touched on a couple of these items, but I think this is kind of a nice, clean way to look at what's the variables that actually changes, how people attack, how persistent the attack is, to what extent do they keep persistent in the face of, frictional resistance or increasing, sophistication of defenses. So a couple of things that we think about is like, what is the monetization potential? How quickly can they cash out, and how much can they cash out? And that's, would you say that's probably the biggest variable to think about in this scenario?
My thing is that I break cybercrime up into three necessities, as you know: gathering data, committing crime, cashing out. If you can't put cash in pocket at the end of the day, you're useless. I mean, that's what it all boils down to for over 99% of these crimes. You have to be able to put cash in pocket. Now, when we're talking about ease of cash out, there's a difference between stealing money and putting cash in pocket. It's fairly easy to do business email compromise and trick a payroll department into sending a couple $1 million to a bank account. But cashing that out, converting that to cash in pocket, pretty difficult at that point. So what I would say is you need to separate the two. Monetization on cybercrime is extremely easy. It's extremely easy. It costs money to do that, but it's easy from the criminal side because of the way criminal networks work, the collaboration, the tools that are used, all that sharing of information and working together. At that point, though, once the crime is committed, once that product service is compromised, or once the money's sent to a bank account, at that point, how do you cash it out? Well, there's a system of money mules if you're out of country that operate, and they're very effective. And what happens is so if you're using money mules stateside, the attacker that's actually committing the crime, he gets anywhere from 40 to 60% of whatever that dollar amount is that they're actually cashing out. The mules get the other percentage of that, and then they share it among the other cash out mules that are there. It's usually never one cash out mule. You've got a head guy that's operating a group of people that then work together like that. And that that is very sophisticated when you think about it. It's very sophisticated, and but it's not rocket science either. I mean, it's stuff, people working together. End of the day, is it easy enough to cash out because of the way cybercrime platforms are there? Yes, it is, but you have to work together to do that.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, especially when you think about the account security point, is that because of that ultimate cash out, it's created an economy of its own, that people are reselling accounts, and there's people making money all along the way, and it's this sort of like complex ecosystem. It's not just one person being like, oh yeah, I'm going to buy my bots, buy my infrastructure, and then cash out. It's often.
And that's what's really interesting about this. Looking at it now, when I was a criminal, you're knee deep in it, and it's hard to see the forest for the trees. But looking now from that chief criminal officer point of view, you're able to see the way these groups operate. You take that perspective. You see the marketplaces that are stealing the data, and they don't worry about really committing the crime. They worry about coming up with a good product or tools that a criminal can use. Then the criminals, you've got these people who are specializing in that one specific type of fraud. It doesn't matter whether they're in country or out of country. They're specializing in that one specific type of fraud. This is their career. This is what they do. And then finally, you've got a group of cashiers, a group of money mules that sit there and say, well, we have accounts, we can cash out. So when you're talking about signups, when you're talking about logins, all these different types of things, a lot of that is for strictly money laundering. And when you come to that money laundering necessity of cybercrime, that tends to be the funnel. That's where you're like, how do I put cash in pocket? Well, you've got fintechs, you've got financial institutions, you've got gift cards, you've got all these different types of avenues that you can use to try to put cash in pocket. And it's very effective, and it's very sophisticated from the platform point of view. For the criminal point of view, it's basically plug and play. Any idiot these days can come in and be profitable when it comes to committing these crimes.
Yeah. And, there's a couple of other points that we could touch on here, but we could probably spend half an hour talking on just this slide alone, which we won't, don't worry, everybody. So there's, when you think about kind of, those people along the chain and how much money they're making, some of the other factors that come into play is like, where is that person located? What's their socioeconomic circumstances? What is a profit for them? It might not be the same as somebody sat in California or London. Like it's, somebody, depending where people are, depending on the circumstances of their situation and their geolocation, what makes something alluring to get involved with can change fairly dramatically. And we saw that in the pandemic as well, that really shift, kind of almost day to day at one point.
Well, it's important to realize I think a lot of people don't understand, but fraud costs money. From the bad guy side of things, you have to come up with proxy addresses, browser fingerprints, the account information. You have to use the tools. You have to, if you're using tools, you have to buy access to those tools or buy those tools. So you've got all these expenditures that come out from the fraudster side. And what you said is exactly right. You've got people in different areas of the world where profit to one guy is not profit to another, and the expenditures for one is not what some other person can afford. So you've got all these different avenues, and that's what you look at when you're defending against these types of attacks. You look at how much money that fraudster is spending to commit this crime, because he is spending money to commit this crime. So you figure out how much money he's doing to do that, and you raise that cost. You raise the cost to the point where it's not really profitable for the criminal to do that, because typically a criminal is committing multiple crimes at the same time. It's never just one account takeover. He's trying to take over multiple accounts at the same time. So it costs money. If you raise the cost, criminal goes elsewhere to commit that crime. Yeah,
which leads us nicely onto the final point that we're going to talk about. Oh, no, I forgot about that slide. Not quite final. Very smooth operation around here. So this is really talking about kind of, everything's not created equal. The target's not created equal. Right. I think as we all kind of understand that, it's perhaps going to cost more to attack a bank or like a credit card and something like that versus something that doesn't have quite that sell on account as account, right, on the dark web. So it really changes the amount of the effort, expenditure, all that jazz to actually really carry out these attacks, and vice versa for the businesses. They're going to kind of put take this into account when figuring out what defenses to put in place.
And I love this graphic you've got here, because it really puts into visuals what I was just talking about. This idea that a criminal, whatever access he has to funds, that will determine the type of crime that he's committing. And if you look at this graph, you see how difficult some of these crimes are to commit, the expenditures that it takes on the criminal side. It's not difficult to take over a streaming service or to set up fake accounts at a streaming service. The types of tools that are required for that, it costs money, but they're far different than the types of tools that are required for credit card logins or accounts and financial institution accounts. So a criminal will see what he's able to afford, and then he will determine the type of crime that he commits at that point. So again, you raise that cost, you're really taking care of a lot of the fraud that's out there.
Absolutely. And just one final note before we pass over to our panelists. Understanding the motivations and understanding the ultimate payout of these account security attacks can inform the way that we defend against these. And the really kind of, high level three-pronged approach that looks good on the slide, way that we approach this. The way we think about it is like that kind of defense in depth detection. What can we put in place to make sure that people can't use cheap tools or, really up the cost of being able to even just fly under or try and evade the detection. The other part is, when and how to use some kind of risk-informed tailored friction. The more friction you put in place, the more expensive it is to attack.
Right.
And that kind of analysis and learning, the ultimate goal is to stop the attackers, but make it as easy as possible for the good users. And that really kind of requires that advanced and sophisticated, ongoing machine learning assisted analysis and continuous learning and feedback loops. Does that sound about right, Brett?
That's absolutely right. I mean, it's absolutely correct. I mean, this idea that a criminal will, the ease of access for the largest return on his investment. That's the way crime is actually committed. You raise that, you take care of that. At the same time, though, what's really important to remember is that you don't want friction on the legitimate customer side. You want to cause the criminal friction, but never the customer. And we are extremely good about doing that.
Yeah. And I think that will be a big topic for our panelists coming up next. So without further ado, I'll pass over to them, and thank you very much for your time, Brett.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Cheers.